In this video, I'm going to share some tips and advice to self-study for the GED. So first you need to know that there are 4 different sections on the GED test. One section is the Reasoning through Language Arts, or also called RLA. This is a 150-minute test. There's 3 different parts to it. And one of those parts is a 45-minute essay. Now the essay is nothing to stress out about because technically you could get a 0 on it and you could still pass the RLA section if you do well on the multiple choice. And there's a lot of videos I have on the essay that I'll link to down below to help you with that. But for RLA, you should know that there are 3 different topics here. One of them is reading for meaning. Another topic is identifying and creating arguments. And also you'll have grammar and language. Now, in addition to the RLA, there's also a social studies section, which is a 70-minute test. And there's only one part. It's mainly reading comprehension and looking at graphs and tables, so things like reading passages and answering questions. And for the social studies test, you will be able to bring a calculator. There may be some basic calculation questions on it, but it's mainly reading comprehension. So there's also a science section, which is a 90-minute test. And for science, you'll have just one section. And you can bring a calculator to that, and if you can't bring a calculator with you because you don't have one, there'll be a calculator provided for you on screen at the testing center. And so for the science section, there's no essay for science anymore. So if you have an older textbook where it talks about writing for science, don't worry about that. That's discontinued. The 3 topics for science are reading for meaning, designing and interpreting science experiments, and using numbers and graphics in science. There's also a math section. The math section is 115 minutes long, and there's a formula sheet. So for the majority of formulas, you're not going to have to memorize them, so don't worry too much about that. There's 2 parts to the math. There's the no calculator portion, which is very brief. It's only a handful of questions, so you will be able to use your calculator for most of the math section. Now, the specific details about the test sections can change sometimes, like the amount of time and like specific details, things like those. So depending on when you're watching this video, if things change, just please check before you take your test. I'm not anticipating there's going to be any major changes to the GED anytime soon, but just know that they do change things up every now and then. Now, the hardest section for most people tends to be the math section, and the second hardest tends to be the RLA. But that being said, everybody's different, and some people do find social studies or science to be the hardest. So just something to keep in mind here. And as a quick tip here, know that you don't have to take all the GED sections at once. You can schedule each test separately, which I would recommend just to give you a little bit more breathing room in between them. But some people do like to schedule multiple tests in one day and just bang them out. You have to do what's going to work for you. Now, there's no right or wrong order to take the test sections in. Some people wonder which one they should start with, sections, or just focus on one at a time. That's also up to you, but I do have a kind of a method here and that you can kind of use to give yourself some guidance to help you pick the hardest, to help you pick which section you should start with. And so the way it works is I call this the Champions Combo just to give it a fun name here, to go along with Test Prep Champions, my channel here. But you're going to pick out your hardest subject. So just for example, let's say that's math for you. And you're also going to pick out your easiest subject. So just for example, let's say that that's social studies for you, right? So you pick the hardest one and the easiest. Now, you're going to focus most of your study time on the easy one, right? That way you get some momentum going, you get some confidence going. So I just gave you 80%, focus 80% of your time on that easiest subject and 20% on the hardest subject. But it could really be like 90% on the easiest and 10% on the hardest, however you want to split it up. But the point here is, I want you to, if you follow this method here, pick the easiest ones, spend most of your time on that, but just spend a little bit of time on the math too, or whatever the hardest one happens to be for you. And so the point here is that eventually you're going to be able to pass social studies, so you'll get that out of the way. Then you pick your second easiest section. So let's say for you that's science, so you'd be doing 80% of your time studying for the science, and then a little bit of time here and there on the math, right? Then eventually you get the science done, then you do the same thing with your third easiest. So the next would be the RLA. Focus 80% of your study time on that. Just do a little bit of math here and there. And then eventually you'll pass the RLA. And the idea here is that eventually you're going to pass all 3 of the other sections, leaving you just with your hardest subject. But by the time you've gotten to the point where you want to focus just on your hardest subject, you've already dabbled in math so much that you'll have a strong foundation, and hopefully it won't take that much longer to finish the math section, all right? Or whatever your hardest happens to be. Now, this might not work for you, but this is just a suggestion here for one way that you can go about picking which sections to start with. So another question that a lot of people have revolves around textbooks. So textbooks for the GED usually cost between $20 to $30, maybe a little less, maybe a little more, but you shouldn't have to spend too much more than $30. Now, note that you absolutely don't have to buy a textbook. You don't need a textbook because there's enough information out there for free just on my channel alone, let alone other GED channels and other advice out there on YouTube and on the internet. So you don't need to buy a textbook. So if you're really hurting for cash or if it's a hardship, you can skip it. But that being said, I do highly recommend buying a textbook if you can afford one. I think that buying a textbook will help you give you more guidance. It'll give you more structure. There's definitely tons of practice problems in most textbooks, so there's definitely advantages. You'll probably pass faster and get a higher score, but then again, if you can't afford it, don't worry about it. There is enough info out there for free that you can definitely still pass. Now, the next question people often ask would be, which textbook is best to pick from? And for this, I highly recommend another teacher out there. This is a GED teacher named David Cohen. He has a channel on YouTube here, and I'll link to it down below, but he did a video on this where he called it the best and worst GED books. And really, if you haven't heard of his channel, I highly recommend subscribing and going back through his older videos and watching them, because I think he's one of the best channels, if not the best channel that I've seen out there among the GED channels that I watch from time to time. I think his is one of the best. His information is great, so check out his stuff. But basically, he says in his video that some of his best recommendations are the Paxton textbook, and then also Princeton Review and Kaplan. Now, for those who have seen my videos before, you'll know that I generally do recommend Kaplan to people, and that's because that's what I've had the most experience using myself, especially when I was doing a lot of tutoring in person. And that also seems to be one of the most popular options. So know that there's nothing wrong with Kaplan. It will get the job done for you. But that being said, David basically says in his video on different textbooks that he thinks that Princeton Review's practice problems are more similar to the real test than Kaplan's. And now I don't have that much experience with Princeton Review, so I can't really speak to which is better here. But, I mean, David has tons of experience, so I'd be the last person to argue with his opinion on that. So Princeton Review might actually be a better option for you than Kaplan. So, but at the end of the day, any of these textbooks will get the job done for you. There's other textbooks out there too besides Princeton Review and Kaplan. So really, most published textbooks will work for you. Just some might be a better fit for others. But shop around and see what kind of deal you can come up with and pick out which one's best for you. Now, some people also wonder which textbook is the best year to buy. And the bottom line is that I do recommend getting the latest edition of the textbook if possible. So if you're going to the store tomorrow, I would pick out 2022 or whatever year you happen to be watching this video, 2023, 2024, 2050. Okay, that's a joke. You probably won't be watching this in 2050. Hopefully you'll have the GED by then. But you get the point here. I would get the latest edition just because I think that they do make small changes and the GED service makes minor updates here and there. So that's why I would try to get the latest if you can, but know that any book published after 2014 is going to be just fine. It'll be basically the same. One difference is some of the older textbooks have a science essay in it, which, again, like I said earlier, the science was discontinued. So there's some minor things like that, but for the most part, if you already have an older textbook, as long as it's from 2014 or later, you don't need to buy a new one. So I now want to present to you a little model here that I came up with, and again, I called it the Champions model here just to go along with Test Prep Champions. My channel here, have a little fun. And this model that I kind of made up here I put it together here. It's just to give you kind of a strategy for how to approach the material. So the first step in your self-studying is always going to be to learn the material. Now, when you learn the material, you're basically just taking the information in, and you do this through reading your textbook or watching YouTube videos, or if you're doing a class or something like that, that's another way of learning the material. But this is where a lot of people get stuck. A lot of students have a stumbling block in that they focus just on learning passively, just by watching videos and just by reading, and they don't do nearly enough actual doing. So the second step here is to test yourself, okay? And this is really the most important step. And the people who pass the fastest, from my experience, are those that spend more time testing themselves, all right? So, the idea here is that if you just watch a GED video, it's easy to sit there and think, okay, I can follow this, I understand this, but you don't really know if you understand it until you test yourself on it, right? So that's why you always, always, always need to test yourself. So if you're watching my videos, I often tell people to pause the video and I'll give you practice problems to try. So that's an example of testing yourself. It could also be if you're using a book, you would read a chapter. Let's say you read a lesson on fractions, then there's practice problems right there in the book, and you go through some of them. And often what happens is you read the chapter, you think you understand it, then you go to try the problems and you realize that you're having trouble and you're stuck. And so that's why I have this arrow here, because that's often going to happen. You think you understand it, you test yourself, you realize, no, I actually don't understand this. So you go back and reread that chapter, or at least reread the part of the chapter that you're stuck on, or you go back and you rewatch the video, or you find another video on that same topic. But anyway, what I want you to do is focus on testing yourself until you know that you can get problems right on a certain topic. Then you can move on to the next phase. Now, the next phase here is repetition. For most people, the first time you learn something, you're probably not going to remember it for too long, which is why repetition is very important here. So I really recommend taking notes as you study, and then just review your notes every few days or once a week or as much as you need to. For some topics, if you really focus and you really put a lot of effort into it, if you do a good job with your learning phase and if you do a good job with testing yourself, you probably won't need to do that much repetition, which is why testing yourself is such a powerful method to learn the material, because it's going to help you just understand it better and retain it longer. So you won't need to do as many reps with that to really remember it if you've done a good job with the first two phases. But just note that after you've proven to yourself that you understand something by testing yourself, you'll want to come back to it from time to time and just keep yourself fresh on it so you don't get too rusty. All right, and so after all of that, you could keep this up, keep going with the first three steps until you are ready to reach your goal score. All right, now you might be wondering, but how does the scoring actually work? So let me tell you. There's 3 levels of scoring on the GED test, and you need to score at least a 145 to pass each subject. That would be just a passing score, but also if you score higher than that, you score within the 165 to 174 range. This is what's called the college ready range, and depending on which school you want to go to, if you want to go to college, a community college or a 4-year school or whatever you want to do, you might be able to be exempt from certain placement tests if you score in this range here. And then the third range is the college ready plus credit score, which would be scores between 175 to 200. Now, note that scores that are this high are relatively rare, especially a perfect score like a 200. Those are very, very rare. Very few people do that. Now, if that's your goal and you want to aim for a score that's this high, then definitely go for it. You never know what you can do if you work hard. You might surprise yourself. But I just want to be clear that it is very difficult. So, don't feel bad if you aren't able to get up into this range. But anyway, depending on where you want to go to college, you might even be able to earn some college credits early just for your high score if you do score in this range. So just something to keep in mind. Now, if you don't score in the college ready range, don't worry about it, because actually at most colleges, you're not required to do this. Most colleges, and by that I mean the vast majority of them, as far as I know, do not require college ready scores. So if you just pass the GED with a basic score and score at the first level, you're still going to be able to get into college at least the majority of schools, so don't worry about that. So another common question people often have is, do I have to know everything in a textbook or everything on all of your videos or everything on YouTube to pass? And the answer is no. You do not have to know everything just to pass. But that being said, if you're aiming for a very high score, like if you're aiming for one of these college ready scores, or especially if you want to aim for a college ready plus credit score, then just to be safe, then you do want to try to know everything. I mean, I know that might not be what you want to hear, but to get a very high score, then yes, you would want to probably try to learn every little thing in a textbook. It's going to take you some time, but that's why those scores are so hard to get. Now, if you're just aiming to pass, though, I definitely recommend you overkill your studying. By that, I mean you want to get to the point with your studying that you're pretty sure you could pass, and then keep going. Just do a little bit more, maybe do a lot more, just to give you that extra confidence boost and to give you that little cushion there, so that you'll be extra confident going into your test. So another common question is, how can I know when I'm ready to take the test? Well, the best way to do that is to take an official GED ready practice test. These are the best way to gauge if you're likely to pass or not. And I just want to say here that, I have no reason for recommending this. I don't work for the company. I don't get paid by the testing service. So I don't have any reason to recommend this. I'm just telling you guys honestly what my opinion here is and what my experience and stories I've heard from many test takers shows that these tests are the best way to tell if you're likely to pass. It's going to give you a score approximation, which will basically, it's going to do what it says. It's going to tell you if you're likely to pass or not. And there's no guarantee, but if you get a likely to pass score and you're feeling confident, you're probably in a good place to go take the test, okay? So these used to be $6 each. I believe they've now raised them to $6.99 each. And so that can get expensive. I do recommend taking at least one per each GED section. And I strongly recommend doing this if you can afford to do so. Now, I know $6.99 for one section doesn't sound like a lot, but it does add up if you're doing that for each section. And especially if you're taking more than one practice test, which some people do take several practice tests. In fact, for the harder sections like the math, it's not uncommon to take 2 or 3. Some people do take 5 or 6. Most people probably don't take that many, but I do know that some people take tons of practice tests. So on average, probably 2 or 3 is pretty typical, but some people do 1. Some people don't do any and they still pass, but I really do believe that these are your best bet. And so, if you're in a situation where it's a hardship for you to buy these tests, then don't worry about that. There are other options out there. I do have practice tests and practice quizzes on my channel that have been helpful to people. There's other free information out there too, like David Cohen's channel that I already mentioned earlier in this video. So you can still pass for free based off of the practice test here on YouTube, but they can't approximate your score for you the way the official test can. So that's why I strongly recommend doing those. But if cost is an issue for you, then it's not the end of the world. Yeah. So moving forward here, I just want you also to know that the tests are randomized. So if you have a friend or someone that passed the GED and they tell you what was on their test, they may have gotten a different version of the test than you. So it's good to listen to everybody's experience and good to hear what everyone has to say. But, if someone tells you there were fractions or there were slope questions or whatever on their section, doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have the same questions on your test, all right? Nobody can predict exactly which topics you're going to get because they're randomized, all right? And there's 3 different versions of each test. And like I said, it's randomized, so you don't know which version you're going to get. So like I said, your test version is probably going to be different from other people. But note that here that, like I said, there's only 3 different versions of each test. So if you failed the test 3 times, you will eventually be retaking one of the same tests, okay? So this brings me to an important point here, which is a question a lot of people have. What typically happens if I fail a section of the GED? So first, let me just give you a little disclaimer here. I'm going to share generally what's going to happen, generally what happens if you fail a section here. But retake policies vary by location and testing center. They do change from time to time. So unfortunately, I don't know and I can't tell you what the policies are going to be in each location and for every single situation. So I'm going to give you a basic overview here of what generally happens. And if that doesn't answer your question about what happens in your situation or in your state, then please contact the GED testing services to confirm the policies in your area and situation, all right? You can comment down below. Maybe somebody else will live in your state or maybe someone else will know the answer, but pretty much everything I know about the retake policies I'm including here in this video. So you're welcome to ask down below, but unfortunately I probably won't know the answer to some of these questions. So that's why I would recommend asking the testing service. So basically here goes. Typically, if you don't pass on your first try, you're going to get 2 retakes without a waiting period. Now, typically, if you fail on your third try, what happens is you're going to have a 60-day waiting period to try again. So, like I said, there's 3 different versions of the test. If you fail 3 times, you will eventually be retaking one of those same tests that you already took, but you have to wait 60 days. So you may not remember everything from so long ago. So, trying to remember everything from your first 3 attempts, it might not be that helpful because you have 60 days to wait, but just know that you will be taking one of those same tests again, unless they make a change to the policy, but that's what it is currently. And also know that as far as cost goes for a GED testing service, know that their fees for your second and third try are going to be waived. But again, that's going to vary by state and testing center, which is, like I said, I can't really tell you exactly what's going to happen in your state or at the testing center you're going to, but they do waive the fee for your second and third try. And after your third try, you're going to have to pay the full amount again for your fourth try. But then the next 2 tries after that are going to be discounted. All right, so, but there's a stipulation here. In order to get that discount, you have to retake within 1 year of paying the original price. All right, and so like I said here, I'm just the messenger. I just want to relay this information to help guide you along the way, but I really recommend for further questions on the retake policies and just in general to confirm the policies at your location and for your situation, just ask the GED testing service. That's going to be your best source. So just as a general thing here, some people make mistakes with their note-taking. They kind of take an all or none approach where they think they have to go all in and write down everything in their books and videos, or they don't take any notes. That's why balance is really key. And so definitely when you're taking notes, try to capture the big ideas and insights. Don't worry too much about the facts. And definitely another reason why I recommend practice tests if you can is because it's going to help you understand how much detail you have to write down when you take your notes. So speaking of practice tests, you can try them out right now on my channel. You can click the video link and you can try those out. But thank you for watching. Hope this video was helpful and good luck to you. I wish you the best of luck with your studying.